Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to Movie Night here on Random Trek. I am your faithful, yet totally human, no way I'm a replicant, Christopher Ingle. Joined as always by my faithful first officer, the man who I think is as close to cybernetic as I'm ever going to meet. It's Commander Brennan, the mystical Mar. Brennan, how we doing?
I want more life.
That does explain a lot about the knowledge stored in that noggin of yours when you were like killing it on movie trivia
Mm.
leagues. I mean, that can only be put there by some sort of computer brain. So I'm with
Mm.
Chris on that theory.
And you, of course, hear a
You like
third
to know.
you hear a third voice today. Today, we are taking a look at the long-awaited look at the sci-fi noir classic Blade Runner.
Mm.
And joining us today is a bit of a movie expert. We love this guy. We've watched this man compete in the Schmodown community. We love him. This guy has some amazing tours. Check him out if you're ever in the LA area. It's our good buddy Paul. How's it going?
Hello. Yes. May I plug the movie guys? Because we do something there called the Ford Fiesta, where my cohort Adam Witt and I look at all the Harrison Ford movies chronologically. We're up to Presumed Innocence. I mean, we've already done our Blade Runner episode, so twist my arm to talk about that movie yet again.
Well, as always, it's movie night, so I turn the con over to Commander Mar.
Thank you, Captain Ingle. Blade Runner. Well, what can we say about this movie that it's not been said?
Nothing. Good night,
That's
everybody.
a
Oh.
short episode.
The infamously disastrous production and the history of all the various edits are the stuff of movie legend. I mean, this, along with Apocalypse Now, might be the two most famous movies where the behind the scenes is almost as fascinating as what's on screen. But we're going to get into the movie. So we're going to break it down as I always do. But the first thing I would like to say is this was released 2 weeks after E.T. and didn't do that well at the box office. But slowly and surely, it built up a fan following. And finally, 25 years later, uh, Ridley Scott got to basically make it so it reflected his vision. This Blade Runner is directed by Ridley Scott, based on a screenplay by Anton Fancher and David Peoples, based on Philip K. Dick's novel Do Androids Dream the Electric Sheep? So let's get into the plot and the story. So, the plot of this movie is very straightforward. There are rogue replicants on Earth. It's up to Blade Runner Rick Deckard to hunt them down and, as they say, retire them, which is just a euphemism. So, plot-wise, it's pretty straightforward. Now, it has been criticized in the past of maybe being overly long for such a simple plot. We'll start with our guest, Paul Preston. Paul, your thoughts on the plot of this movie and whether or not the movie is overly long. What are your thoughts?
I don't believe it's overly long when you can really immerse your audience in a world of the future. There's lots to keep your senses a buzz, even if the story isn't moving along at the speed you would like. So I don't think anybody would say that. I mean, I'm clearly some people have said that. I don't know anyone who's said that, but Yeah, because I know, it's not I mean, long today. I mean, every movie's like 2.5 hours now. So
Mhm.
like, back then, I don't have the running time, or do I? Of this one? No, I don't think I do. But never felt long to me. Um, yeah, I think the tagline for the film was the star of Raiders of the Lost Ark and the director of Alien take you to the savage future of 2019, which of course is hilarious now. I think I've seen that graphic go along around the internet that we're now at the Soylent Green phase of movie futures.
Mhm.
So that's where we are and working our way up to who knows what, and what sort of craziness is awaits us in the future if we were to follow the movie's path. But no, I like keeping it simple, but putting it in an interesting place. If it were more complicated, no one would. I think people would tune out. That's my problem with sci-fi and fantasy books I've tried to read over the years. And I never read the source for this, but Philip K. Dick has got to be the best author translated to film, perhaps after Stephen King. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Right, Total Recall, he wrote, as well as We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. That was what Total Recall was called. Minority Report, The Adjustment Bureau, A Scanner Darkly. I mean, the guy, everything he wrote was easily translatable, apparently, to film because they did it over and over again. So maybe I should read one of his books because perhaps that became a movie means that it is easy to read. But sometimes I get into sci-fi and fantasy and I can just tune out in a book because it's too deep and too much. So I think in 2 hours you don't have a lot of time. I've always said a book is. I agree that books are better than movies. If you read a book in 2 hours, it would be terrible. So,
Mm.
so I think you got to pare it down and make it palatable. And I think this movie does that pretty well. But again, as long as you're just putting those Lawrence Paul sets and that great photography and everything, all keeping your other senses occupied, to me, I didn't even notice.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said because there are a few films that are able to transport you to a sense of place the way this film does. It, I mean, just creating this world is fascinating. Captain Ingle, your
Yeah.
thoughts on the plot and the length of the movie?
Well, the plot does some interesting things that I really like. You got to chase down these replicants, and it really sets up the questions about this world and what we as human beings value, and giving it artificiality in an age where AI generated things is becoming more and more a question. This film slowly becomes more and more relevant. So the plot to me, it works, and it's a noir film. It's supposed to be. So it really reminds me of those Sam Spade, Humphrey Bogart type things, and those don't bother me. There
Dixon
was,
Hill.
yeah, Dixon Hill,
Mhm.
Star Trek. Uh, but it takes its time and it's allowed to, and I really like that. This is not an action-packed film. It has its moments, but this is a slow burn, and it's supposed to be, because the concepts and the ideas and the people, it's a slow development, but it's fine that way.
I'd be curious to know if the noir was brought in as a translation of the book or if that's apparent in the novel as well, because I think that's a great take, sci-fi but noir because it has everything. Femme fatale, questionable hero, morally, you get dark photography, narration, over the top in the first cut. So it's all there. I mean, I just wondered if it was there in the source material, if that was their take, because I think that's a cool take.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that the plot, is very simple, but I think that I agree with you, Paul, that if it had been more complicated, it might have been hard to get into. And really and there's a difference, I think, between plot and story. This film might have a simple plot, but there's a lot of story going on here. And I think if they had cut it down in terms of time, it might have kind of ruined that effect. Now we have to go now to the best part of any movie, in my opinion, And that's the characters. I just want to point out that there are a lot of actors here that are pretty familiar now. Maybe they weren't so much then, but you had people like character actors like James Hong and Emmett Walsh. You had Daryl Hannah. You had Rutger Hauer, Edward James Olmos, Sean Young. And the list of people that you have there that's really quite extraordinary
Pretty stacked.
because several of these actors, this is the beginning of their career or very early in their career. And so we're not going to go into each of those characters just because there's we don't necessarily have the time. But I do want to ask a question. What is the deal with Gaff, played by Edward James Olmos? This guy seems to know an awful lot. I'd be interested, Paul, what do you think Gaff is up to? Paul, that's for you.
Well, I had never, I don't know. I never really thought about that. I mean, he's a yeah, skeptic. I mean, I haven't seen it in a while to track any of his small moves to see if they relate to some bigger plot he has in mind, but he certainly is, shifty. But yeah, no, I haven't thought of that. You got a big swing on that, Chris? Because yeah.
I view Gaff as one of these kind of outside characters. This is someone that is not directly involved in the plot, and yet they are kind of like a third person narrator who's watching everything from the sides. I think there's a greater mind there. A lot of people question, is Gaff a replicant? I don't know. I don't know if he is or isn't. That does make him very interesting here, uh, in terms of his purpose and leaving the little clues, the little paper crane and, all of that. It's like, why does he do that?
Mm.
Why be a part of that? Why go into all that effort before? And I think it's to leave this air of mystery to us and that question of ourselves when we look, because I think there was a long time where people were asking too, is Deckard a replicant or
Mm.
not? That question has come up. I don't believe that he is, but again, it really makes us look at ourselves and what are we and what is our purpose in all of this. Tie it back to the replicants and Rutger Howard and in what I call his very Shylock experience. If you prick us, do we not bleed? He didn't say that. That's Shylock from Shakespeare. So I think he's that questioning. What is existence? What is us? What am I? What are you? Who are we? Are we just a part of a system? Are we created from something else? It's like it opens up more questions, and he's kind of like the gatekeeper to asking those questions.
Yeah, I mean, he really gives the coda to this film. His final line in the movie. It's too bad she won't live, but then again, who does? I mean, that's a deep question right there.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to live? And right, Gaff is kind of that guy that's meant to get us to think, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's talk about Shelley Young as Rachel. This, I believe, was her third movie. Rachel is a fascinating character. She is very much that femme fatale archetype. The hairdo and the shoulder pads are like something that drawing a blank, but there's an actress in the golden age of Hollywood, Mommy Dearest, who's
Yeah, Joan Crawford. Yeah, she does
Joan
look like that.
Crawford. She has the not to bring Mommy Dearest because that's a whole other story, but she looks like something. The hair and the shoulder pads, it's a very Joan Crawford look. Um, very much in keeping with the noir aspect of the film. And she's interesting. because she is an experimental replicant that doesn't have some of the hiccups that the others do. But it's interesting that she does not know what she is. And it's sort of an interesting look at if a replicant doesn't know they're a replicant, do they even have any way of suspecting? It's a fascinating question, and the idea that she is this sense of wanting to find her place in the world. Captain Ingle, your thoughts on this character?
I'll be honest, for me, I've always viewed her as kind of the weaker part of our character lineup.
Mm.
She comes off as a damsel in distress, as a lot of these noir films will have. You'll have that damsel that kind of instigates our detective person to kind of dig deeper, but gets under his skin in a positive way, and they end up together. But she's just weird to me. And as a performance, I'm not the biggest fan of her. I will be frank. She's done a lot of films.
Yeah.
I have not liked her in anything she's done.
Mm.
I
Yeah,
haven't.
2 years
And
after
yes,
this, she did
Ace
Dune,
Ventura.
so.
Ace Ventura, Finkel is Einhorn. I hate her in that.
Stripes?
gosh.
Come on.
I just don't like her. I don't know what it is. But she's not compelling in this. She comes off too much as the damsel in distress, when I think there's a deeper possibility for her here. When you're asking those questions, what am I? Who am I? What am I to do? There's a deeper meaning in there, and she just comes off as too weak for me. I want strength. I need strength from her, and I don't think she gives that performance.
Yeah, Paul, your thoughts on this?
I wonder if she's incapable of it. Like maybe this programming has limitations. So she can't have these incredible experiences that would make her human. It's just impossible to get there. Not that it may even be purposeful, but it's just like she can't be human and be all those emotions that you want, and that's the great tragedy of her character.
I don't
Perhaps
know.
riffing.
I would have to disagree with that. Only that I don't know, obviously, the in-world logistics of what makes a replicant a replicant. Are there different types of replicants that do different things, or are they all set up with the base programming? And if we're going off of Asimov's laws, which a lot of these science fiction writers did, then somewhere in there there's a similar programming to me. If Rutger Hauer's character can find that passion and that question of life and existence, that we have a right to live, we have a right to be, so should she be able to figure that out, in my mind.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that Sean Young does pretty well here. But yeah, it is a very limited role. And that's kind of the unfortunate. Now, then we got on the opposite end of the spectrum.
But can I throw one more thing in about her?
Go ahead.
Because it is interesting in the supposed romantic scenes with her and Deckard. He's not like kind. He's like grabbing her and kissing her and making her kiss him.
That's
and
really
it's like
the elephant in the room in this movie.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's just like how replicants get treated. Like there's no like maybe Howard's the fluke, like that next step in their evolution where generally it's just toss him around, kiss him, whatever, throw him, do what you gotta do. We don't care, it doesn't matter, and now he's the first one who's got to make a stand and say, wait a second, we deserve humanity. And
see, that reminds me more in theme to Spielberg /
Short Circuit.
AI.
Oh, sorry,
I was
what?
thinking of AI, artificial intelligence.
Not Short Circuit.
I was thinking of AI.
Not Johnny Fives.
And how in that world, all of the robots and the androids, they're treated as toys, as
Mm-hmm.
items, as, second class
They have to
anything. And
battle
then
to
you
the
get,
death in arenas, and yeah.
yeah, and then you get David, who excels beyond that, is
Mm,
able to go beyond that and can love. But is it a genuine love? We're asking ourselves the same questions with these. Is this genuine? Is it real?
mm-hmm.
Are they human? Are these feelings programmed? What is this? I think Rutger Hauer and his I'll
Yeah.
call them his minions. I think they do a better job of doing that than she does.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that brings us to Edgar Hauer, who basically steals the movie. If you really think about it. Roy Batty is a fascinating character. Rutger Hauer infuses the character with a lot of inhuman quirks. If you notice, a lot of his movements and the way he says things and the way he behaves, there is an artificiality to him, but also at the same time, a genuine sense of emotion. Um, and I just have to say, one of the greatest scenes in cinema history is the death of Roy Batty. Rutger Hauer, who was new to American audiences at this time, gives us so much here that he basically steals the movie.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful in the role. Chris, you obviously wanted to talk about him. What do you got to
Yeah,
say about this?
he is so Shakespearean, and he does
Mm,
remind me of Shylock in so much. There's an anger and a hate and a pain in there, and yet you see why that was caused. And his speech, that speech in the end.
mm,
I've seen things you people couldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All of these moments will be lost in time, like tears in the rain. It's time to die. Like that. Oh, I mean, there's such poetic beauty and thought in that in all that pain and suffering, it will all be forgotten, and nothing he says is going to matter. Nothing he does is going to matter. Maybe I just need to accept my death. Maybe you need to die. I don't know. I just, it's so powerful and formulative, and this is a guy who is fighting for his right to exist.
yeah, he is very much like Shylock. He is evil because society.
Mhm.
Well, I don't know if I'd say he's evil, but he is villainous because society has been villainous to him. It is very Shakespearean and also visually. I mean, this absolutely beautiful man, a shock of white hair, ice cold blue eyes. He is just a vision to look at. And as I said, some of his works really fit with the fact that he's a replicant. I do want to say that what's interesting about this movie is that the replicants, in many ways, feel more human than the humans. Our human characters are kind of the Rick Deckard, Chief Bryant. They're kind of distanced and jaded. And here you have Roy Downey, particularly in his relationship with Chris. There is much more feeling there. And just on a visual level, as I said, he is a sight to behold. Paul, what are your thoughts on Rutger Hauer here?
Yeah, I would say perhaps his most, he talked himself into the importance of humanity in that speech, and that's probably why he saves Deckard. He says, "Look, you
Mm-hmm.
have life. Maybe you'll hear me and like go live maybe maybe your life is worth extending just because you can have it, where I
Mhm.
cannot, and he definitely, yeah, he's definitely poetic in that moment, and he's definitely, yeah, more human than Deckard at that point. Deckard doesn't even speak for the last like 20 minutes of the movie. So like they give all the speeches to Batty at that point. And it's pretty
It's
interesting that they call them replicants because it's right there in
yeah,
the title of the book that they're androids, but I think the movie thought that was cheesy. And in calling them replicants, that even adds a little more to the fact that they're not android, just clearly they're robots. But replicant is kind of, a future sort of a thing, what is
Well, I think if you're asking this question, when you say android, I think data, I think robot, and
yeah.
that's not human. Now we could argue that with Commander Data. I know that's a whole other
Mhm.
discussion, but by changing it to replicant, what is that? What does that mean? We as the audience
Yes.
question that. And so now we are more likely to give in to the question of humanity. Whereas if they said android, I
Mhm.
don't think we would have gone into believability with that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and
Could every
also the word replicant as in replicate
right.
is
Could
interesting.
could every part of a human be replicated? Or
Mm.
if they're, humans have evolved, and so is evolution part of the replication of humans in a replicant? If so, Batty's showing it. Maybe he won't be the last. He gives a speech and then perhaps someone else comes up, and
Well,
obviously 2049 shows what happens for real later in
yeah,
the
yeah,
story,
I was
but
gonna say
yeah.
that's sort of the next step. And I think that what makes Roy so familiar is that just Roger Howard is such a fascinating actor because he's so meticulous in his choices as an actor. The little acting choices. And I think that he steals the movie. Now we come to our main character, Rick
and
Deckard.
and I believe he died the same year Roy Batty did. I believe. Didn't he die in
2019?
2019? Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, he did. That's
Rest
right.
in
That's
peace.
right. Roger Howard did. Yes.
Yeah.
Now we come to our main character, Rick Deckard, played by Harrison Ford. The reason we brought Paul onto the show. And this is definitely a classic, Philip Marlowe, the Dixon Hill, as we said from Star Trek. Your classic detective type. And in keeping with that, as many of the movie Private Eyes are, he's very jaded. Um, Very kind of unemotional, kind of get care less about the world, misanthropic, I think, and definitely in keeping with the Private Eyes gets called back in for another case, and he's really kind of callous and kind of cruel in certain scenes. So let's start with our resident expert on the great Mr. Harrison Ford, who, by the way, just appeared the other night at the Video Game Awards. Paul, your thoughts on Harrison Ford as Rick Deckard?
First of all, I got the chill. In hilarious fashion, I was in Pasadena
Mm.
trying to find the bench from Shrinking, where Harrison Ford has his scenes
Oh,
with
yes,
Alice,
yes. Mhm.
and I found it in Central Park,
Mm.
or where it would be. I have a feeling they brought in a bench so they could position it just where they wanted to in the park,
Yeah.
but the park and everything in the background of those shots is there. When Adam, the guy I do the Ford Fiesta with, texted me the video of Harrison Ford's appearance, which I then
Hmm.
watched, and I got chills, man. It was great just to
Yeah.
say, well, there's one guy who has something to say about your voiceover.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. I mean, come on, just the chills, and the whole crowd goes nuts. He's
Hmm.
still a legend, even today. But back then, what an interesting choice. Like, you can tell that Ford's itching for the prestige era of the 80s already. Even just a few movies into Star Wars Empire and Raiders, he's already like, what can I do that's going to shake it up, because then he'll do, okay, Jedi and Doom, and then, okay, then he gets on his run of Witness, Mosquito Coast, Frantic, Working Girl, and Last Crusade in there, but then presumed innocent. He's got a chunk of like prestige picks, and I think even though this is billed with the huge star, he's not making it easy. He's not picking just like I'm the hero. Like to your point, he's dark and he grumbles which he's great at now.
The way he behaves toward Rachel is pretty terrible.
Yeah, yeah, and so I think it's a fascinating choice for him to want to play that part after all the heroism, of Empire, and really Empire is his coming out party. Um, Star Wars put him on the map, but Empire was like
The Empire
That's
is
practically a Han Solo
it's
movie,
his film, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So I just thought it was a fascinating choice for him to come in and pick that movie with the character, and I wonder how much he even played up that angle of him. Clearly Scott was cool by the time the movie's done with him being not just a straight, you know, Bruce Willis type hero, um, but for him to have shades of gray, and I really appreciate it. I think that goes a long way, and he plays it really well because he underplays everything, which was what's
Yeah.
his superpower.
And
You
its
watch,
understated grumpiness works really well here.
yeah, and even when it's not grumpy, it's understated. Like look at The Fugitive, like probably the
Oh yeah, yeah,
best actor nomination that should have been for him, but he so underplays it you don't even realize how much he is that movie because he doesn't have the grand monologues like Tommy Lee Jones. He just underplays it all. I think he does that here. It could have been a more bombastic part, but it wasn't. And he calls himself, I think, the detective who doesn't do any detecting.
yeah,
I think that's how Ford referred to his character, which is also
yeah.
true.
Um,
So, the do as little as he can and still win,
yeah,
essentially.
and of course we won't get into it, but infamously, Harrison Ford and Ridley Scott did not get along. Ridley is not exactly what I would call an actress director, and Harrison Ford likes actress directors. But regardless, Chris, your thoughts on Rick Deckard?
He's a flawed hero. I really, really enjoy that about him. He's a bounty hunter. That's the thing we have to remember too. That a Blade Runner is just a bounty hunter. So he's out there to kill these things. He has no qualms about they're replicants. He knows it. That's his job. We watched him take one out. Of course, they kind of ran and caused a little havoc, but we watched him take one out. He has no problem doing that, and yet he sees beyond one of them and tries to save her, tries to help her. That's interesting because it goes against everything that the character is set. And I really love from Harrison Ford that this isn't an Indiana Jones type. This is not a Han Solo type. It's so different than that. There is a lot more humanity in him and what he's doing than I would see. He is our hero, but he isn't the normal, hero that we're used to. This is not flying in on the Millennium Falcon. This is not dun, 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 dun. It's not that. And I like that about that. I like that this is a subtler protagonist. And that Rick Deckard is that. If there is a word I would use, is that he is subtle. And Harrison Ford, this is one of my first times that I saw him, at least in those early years, be able to pull off that subtle. I wouldn't see that subtle again until he flipped the script when he did What Lies Beneath and was shown to be in the end, sorry for spoilers to anyone, to be the villain of the story. I subtle, so subtle, and he plays that well here.
Yeah, I agree. There is a lot of subtlety here. In a film that isn't, well, certainly visually isn't subtle, this performance is very subtle, and the just Harrison Ford getting to play against type, which he could have easily been a victim of typecasting in these years. But this is something totally out there. So let's talk really quick about there's a lot of ideas in this movie. And we don't really have time to go into all of them, but I think that what the one question that I wanted us to discuss is what is the movie saying about what it means to live? Paul, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're despite like if you saw a drone and it was your and you were in the military and it was your job to take it out, you just take it out, right? But shape that drone like a person, and then you've got this movie because it's essentially a dangerous robot. But so that becomes a whole different emotional set of baggage than for Deckard. Um, when you shape it like Sean Young, you know, and so or even Roy Batty at the end when he speaks like Roy Batty or looks like Sean Young. So I think his humanity is tested throughout the movie, and when we have I think I refer to what I said before about Batty's speech, just saying that without again poetically saying this, not saying, "Yeah, I'm dying, so you need to go and live," like he just explains his situation, and by that you should get the idea that, and if something this unrealistic cherishes life, so should you.
Yeah, very well said. Chris, your thoughts?
Wow. I don't think I can follow that.
Mm.
Well, you kind of set it up earlier, yeah, by just talking about that speech. I mean, it is all that. That's like, that's your. A lot of movies have final statements, and I think that's the films.
Mhm.
Like if you were in a courtroom, that would be the lawyer's final statement.
And we obviously this is a Star Trek podcast.
Mhm.
So, this is early 80s. It's not until 1987 that we get Commander Data. And I can't help but think that this lays some groundwork for what would eventually become the lifelong character arc of Commander Data, which is to become human. And the sacrifice that, and I'll say the first time, the sacrifice that he was willing to make for his friends and his captain, and how in that moment, through death or the acceptance of death, he became more human than anything we could have imagined.
And yeah, perhaps
Roy,
like to your point, anyone else in the film.
yeah, Roy Batty in that moment in that speech accepts death, and you see what is truly, I think, the definition of becoming human, and that is accepting what will be our lot, what will be inevitable for all of us, accepting that and living with that. And for that brief moment, he took the rest of his time to help Deckard up to save him. Even though he caused him that to go there, he saved him. And I think to Commander Data in Nemesis, and that moment that he protected his friend, not his captain, he protected his friends, and sacrificed his life. And of course, writing shenanigans, Data reappears many more times. But I think we have this character to thank for the great character of Commander Data, at least in influence and opening up the possibilities of what a synthetic life form could do and could be.
Very well said. I think for me, what I really got here, none of us knows how long we have. We are very much like the replicants, where we just don't know. In their case, they knew when the end was coming, but in our case, none of us knows when that moment will be. And I think that what Roy Betty might be saying here at the end is, I'm everything that I've experienced will be lost. But you, Rick Deckard, everything you've experienced, you need to keep going and make sure that people know it. And make sure that you create a legacy, which by the sequel we see that he did.
And boy, did he. Yeah.
Well, did he? Good question. But I think for each of us, it's we don't know how long we have, but let's make the most of what time we do have. Because this is a movie about time in many ways. And to quote Lord of the Rings, all we have to do is to decide what to do with the time that is given us. All right, so let's end really quick on the visuals. This, in my opinion, is one of the most beautiful films I have ever seen. And visually, very influential. I mean, let me just say, 2022's The Batman, visually, it feels like Blade Runner. So that's the influence that we're still seeing. So, Paul, as our, to sort of give your final thoughts on the movie, but also, what are your thoughts on the visuals as well as the legacy of the movie?
Well, I got a lot of thoughts on the visuals. First of
Mm.
all, if you take the Movie Guys LA Film Locations tour, you get to choose where you go. So we only visit movie locations from films that you love. Currently, downtown is not uh, offered, but I'm going to change that. But on a few bus tours where I've been asked to jump aboard, I made sure we went to a couple places that are downtown. So the Bradbury Building is Batty's place at the end of the film. Union Station is the famous train station right downtown, has been in a billion movies. And that is the police station in Blade Runner. The Second Street tunnel appears a couple times as well, and they all lend themselves to sci-fi numerous times, especially the tunnel. It's been a Terminator, Transformers, a bunch of stuff. But also, I'm going to cross over Star Trek and Blade Runner here and say Douglas Trumbull's your man behind the special effects. So he also did Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and of course 2001 and Close Encounters and a bunch of other things. R.I.P. to that legend. But and the other interesting fact is that right now Hollywood's in a lot of trouble because of last year's strikes. They've had trouble catching up and getting production going and keeping it in L.A. and now. It was because of a strike, I think, back in the day that the set designer and set art decorator had more time to make this movie look awesome. So I don't know. Maybe there's a project out there that started before the strike and now will turn out even better because they had more time with it after everything shut down last year in terms of shooting. But that helped play a part in it. This is a fabulous movie, and of course, in the hands of Ridley Scott, he's in no hurry, and I appreciate that. Sometimes his movies um, can, I'm not going to say that. The guy always takes his time. Even Gladiator 2, just watched recently, and I was like, this movie kind of feels like a movie the whole time I'm watching it. But regardless, it doesn't say anything about slacking on the visuals. In fact, you take them for granted by now. When you're in the Coliseum, you're like, this just doesn't exist. This whole thing that's here doesn't exist. And I don't know how you take it from on the set to the finished product. That is just, to me, still magic, right? Like if you're on the set and there's nothing, there's a couple of things, and suddenly there's a whole world on the screen. There had to be a combination of a lot of things, of course, back in 1982. Tougher to do that than it is today. So I'm doubly as impressed that they made this movie look phenomenal. I recommend you watch the final cut. You can see numerous cuts out there of the film. I think the final one nails it just right. The voiceover that Harrison Ford added to the film, we were talking about this before we started recording with Brennan, that Ford never appreciated it. It always seemed like a bunch of studio execs who wanted voiceover were making him do it. And even though he didn't get along with Ridley, he still said, this is not Ridley's vision. This is what the studio execs want. And he recognizes that. But he did it anyway. And so the fact that it's been taken out is a good thing. And then other cuts, of course, to make things seem more up in the air in terms of the ending and other parts of the film, I think bode well for it. So I recommend the final cut amongst all the different cuts that are out there.
Well, I'll give my final thoughts and then turn it over to the captain. This is a great film. I would call it a masterpiece. There are so many ideas here, but visually and thematically, this is one of the best films out there as far as those two aspects. And it is a classic for a reason. And even though it didn't do great when it first came out, I'm glad that people recognized the brilliance going on here. All right, and with that, I turn it over to Captain Ingle for his final thoughts.
My final thoughts is that we have committed the greatest tragedy today in this podcast, and we did not once mention the amazing work of Mr. James Hong.
Yes.
I just love James Hong. He's that guy who'll show up everywhere, and the guy's 95 and he's still pumping out films. I love this guy, but
Totally.
just had to put that out there for him. But I too, I love this film. I will say I've never watched the sequel. I haven't. It's not that I don't. It's
Pretty
never
good.
really got into
Yeah, I
it.
recommend it. Be prepared. It's very sad, but it's
Mm.
excellent. It's very
Great,
sad.
laying it up front.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those that I definitely recommend, and it's one of those philosophical movies.
Mhm.
This is a deep thinker. Don't think to go into it and have an easy time. No, you're going to come out scratching your head and questioning yourself, and I like that level of existentialism. So I'm game. All right, but I want to thank Paul Preston for coming in. Thank you so much, Paul. I've been a big fan. I'm glad we're a big fan of the same things. It's great.
Yeah. And RIP, fun fact, RCA, Atari, Bell Telephone Company, Pan Am, all were advertised in the future world of LA and all went out of business. There's a little Blade Runner curse out there if you didn't know it. Even Cuisinart went bankrupt but still survives. And Coke, of course, is hugely advertised in the future LA, where it rains all the time. We clearly screwed up the atmosphere. But after is noted after Blade Runner, Coke did give us new Coke, so something went wrong there,
Ugh.
even if it wasn't out of business.
Oh, all right. Well, okay, so coming up in our schedule next week, we will be back to normal. We'll be taking a look at Star Trek Voyager, the second season episode Meld with our good friend. Well, he's a friend if he would be on the show. Hey, if you're listening, Brad, come on our show.
Red
Brad
Door.
Dourif, the Brad Dourif eccentric episode Meld on Star Trek Voyager. It's really great. I just watched it again. Yes, I've watched it like 3 times since I knew we were getting it. It's a good episode.
He's awesome. Yeah.
Then the week after that, we will be back to movie night doing something I picked for Brennan to see because he had never seen it. The Spielberg adjacent Batteries Not Included. I love this movie so much, and I cannot wait to talk about. This was my childhood. I saw this movie on broadcast TV. This was one of those movies that was like on. I called it Channel 2 Fox. It was on a Sunday afternoon at 2, like all the time. And so I watched this all the time. And this and Amazing Stories. Again, Spielberg adjacent. We'll get into that. But we will be looking at that as our holiday film because nothing says holiday like a family of robots. Or are they robots?
The cute kind. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, we're going to bring some of these questions in. But Paul, you've already plugged a lot, but anything else you want to plug? Where can the people find you?
Yeah, themovieguys.net. You'll see all our podcasts, the tour info, and more on there.
Awesome. Brennan, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Blue Sky at Brennan Marr, Facebook at Brennan Marr. I'm
that's
still
right.
on X at Brennan Mystical and on Threads and Instagram at Brennan Blue. And of course at Page Turners They Were Not on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Okay. You can find me on Twitch and Twitter because, yes, I'm still going to call it Twitter because I don't listen to that bougie person. At C. Ingle 1984. But as always, we end every episode. Kapla! And live long and prosper.
Peace and long life.